There is a truth that very few people are brave enough to say out loud. A narcissist does not fear those who fight back fiercely, nor do they fear loud voices. What unsettles them most is the person they once dismissed, the super empath. Because a super empath is a soul born with an extraordinary depth of perception, so profound that even the slightest shift in tone or a fleeting change in someone's eyes is enough for them to sense that something is off. They don't just see actions, they feel the emotional layers beneath them. They hear the sadness hidden behind laughter, detect the forced calmness in a hug, and even sense the lies wrapped in carefully crafted kindness. And precisely because they feel so deeply, for a very long time, they often choose silence. Not because they are blind or weak, but because they genuinely believe that enduring the weight themselves might prevent everything from breaking further. They continue to tolerate, to mediate, to convince themselves that they can maintain peace by absorbing the chaos, and over time, they unintentionally become the place where all the unresolved emotions of others are deposited. Yet, after observing long enough, when the scattered pieces finally start aligning, they are forced to confront a difficult truth. Not every soul wants to be healed. Some people do not seek connection at all, they seek control. And the moment this realization emerges, a profound shift begins within the super empath's slow, subtle, but unmistakably powerful. They no longer react the same way. They withdraw unnecessary explanations, pull back their unconditional softness, and release the need to prove themselves. This quietness does not arise from hurt, but from clarity. And precisely because of that, it terrifies the narcissist far more than any argument ever could. For when the super empath stops playing their part, the narcissist's entire system of control begins to collapse from within. And in today's video, we will dive into that exact turning point, the moment the super empath steps out of the role of the victim, enters a state of awakening, and unintentionally strips the narcissist of the one thing they crave most: control. And from that moment of awakening, another curtain begins to lift, the curtain that reveals the quiet confrontation between intuition and strategy, between the empath's sensitivity and the narcissist's calculation. Empaths are born tuned in to emotions. It isn't a skill they acquire, it is their default way of existing. They don't just notice emotions, they absorb them, as if the emotional energy in their surroundings flows directly into their heart. What others overlook becomes intensely clear to them. A slight crease in the brow, a subtle shift in breathing, a smile that comes too quickly and hides real sadness. They sense the uneasiness behind light-hearted words, the disappointment beneath a forced compliment, and the anxiety buried inside a moment of silence. Because of this profound emotional sensitivity, they are strong in places others are not, but they also hurt in places others never feel. Their tender heart allows them to see beauty, but it also makes them painfully aware of darkness they wish weren't real. On the other side of the spectrum, narcissists operate in an entirely different system. They do not feel others' emotions, they analyze them. They don't hurt when you hurt, nor do they feel discomfort when you are distressed. But this absence of empathy does not imply emotional ignorance. In fact, they are frighteningly perceptive. They observe you like a case study. What delights you, what unsettles you, what throws you off balance. They don't seek connection, they seek data. Every reaction you give becomes part of a growing database they use to refine their control. While empaths connect with their hearts, narcissists connect with intention. The empath listens to understand, the narcissist listens to use. The empath opens up to build, the narcissist opens up just enough to manipulate. And this is where the toxic spiral begins. The empath sees the narcissist's wounds and thinks, maybe they're misunderstood. Maybe if I just love them harder, show more patience, they will change. But what they do not know is that narcissists do not seek healing. They do not want growth, they want obedience. They do not want truth, they want absolute control. And the empath's kindness becomes an endless resource for them to exploit, used, dismissed, consumed without hesitation. Gradually, the empath begins to doubt themselves. It is a quiet process, but devastating. Am I too sensitive? Am I overreacting? Mycosing, well side. Am I the problem? And this moment of self-doubt becomes the fertile ground for manipulation. A person who no longer trusts their own perception is easy to control. A person who wonders, is it my fault? Will always try harder, and that effort keeps them trapped in a cycle with no exit. The narcissist knows this, and they leverage it. They drop subtle hints, half-formed messages meant to make you question yourself but never clear enough to confront. They create moments of closeness to pull you in, then break them to destabilize you. Every move is intentional, precise, calculated. Because to them, your emotions are not something to honor, they are tools to maintain power. As the empath gradually loses trust in themselves, the doorway into the narcissist's real playground also opens a playground where chaos is not a consequence, but a strategy. The inner world of a narcissist is a meticulously crafted blend of tenderness and cruelty. Nothing they do is accidental. They know exactly when to pull you close with a sweet compliment, and just as precisely when to push you away with a subtle but cutting remark meant to confuse you. One day, they treat you as the most precious thing that has ever happened to them. The next, you suddenly become a burden that exhausts them to the core. This abrupt shift is never their true emotion, it is their instrument of control. Their compliments always carry an odd aftertaste, sweet on the surface, but laced with pressure that makes you feel you must try harder to be worthy. Their apologies are never true remorse. They are tests. Tests to see whether you will soften again, whether you will drop your boundaries in exchange for a moment of temporary warmth. And when words no longer suffice, they wield silence like a cold blade. That silence is not contemplation. It is punishment, an engineered void meant to make you anxious enough to crawl back and apologize for sins you never committed. The empath stands in the eye of this contradictory storm, feeling every emotional whip pulling at them like an overstretched rubber band. Hope, guilt, shame, longing. Each feeling is real, but not all of them belong to the empath. And this emotional turbulence creates the kind of psychological injury often described as whiplash trauma, being lifted high only to be thrown down violently, over and over, until you can no longer distinguish what is real from what is manipulation. While you struggle to regain your footing, the narcissist watches you with eyes that are emotionless, yet chillingly sharp. They do not hurt when you cry. They simply wonder, did that line make them break yet? Where contritus faftus? They do not panic when you go silent. They merely ask themselves, has this silence made them anxious enough? They do not feel pride in being loved. They want to know, will this compliment make them cling to me tighter? Every conversation, every gentle touch, every moment they pretend to be vulnerable is a calculated move. They test your boundaries by pushing just a little and then pulling back, observing exactly how far you can be stretched. They store every detail, what makes you feel seen, what triggers old wounds, what ignites your fear of abandonment. And then they turn those very insights into a personalized arsenal of manipulation. Slowly, your internal compass begins to fail. You no longer trust your memory, because every time you recall something accurately, they tell you that you're imagining things. You no longer trust your intuition because each time you sense something is wrong, they accuse you of being too sensitive. You no longer trust your emotions because every time you express hurt, they twist the narrative until you feel like you're the one creating the problem. The most heartbreaking part is that, at some point, you truly begin to believe that every mistake is yours. And while you desperately try to hold on to what you think is love, you cannot see that what you are clinging to is not love at all, but a trap disguised with just enough tenderness to keep you from recognizing it until you're completely drained. And then, in the very moment when it seems they have been completely swallowed by chaos, something strange begins to happen. Not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle shift inside. Yet, that small shift is powerful enough to change everything. That is when awareness awakens. The true power of an empath always begins with something that sounds deceptively simple, but is, in fact, the most crucial turning point: understanding what is actually happening. When they start naming behaviors they once only sensed vaguely: gaslighting, love bombing, devaluation, triangulation, victim playing, strategic apologies, the illusion the narcissist created begins to crack. Awareness never arrives in a single blinding flash. It comes in layers, in waves, a moment of unease, a flicker of something feels wrong, a situation repeating itself a little too perfectly. And with every wave that breaks, they reclaim a piece of themselves, as if slowly reconstructing a map they once believed had been erased. As the truth comes into focus, the super empath shifts their position. From standing right inside the storm, they step back just enough to see the whole landscape. They no longer absorb everything into their body as they once did. Instead, they begin analyzing with clarity. They start asking themselves questions they once avoided. Why is it that every time I express my feelings, everything gets twisted into being my fault? Why does every apology from them come with justification and a new demand? Why does the same cycle repeat exactly the same way every time I soften? The things that once confused them so deeply now become predictable. Not because the narcissist becomes less dangerous, but because the empath finally sees the structure of the game. They realize this is not a difficult but genuine relationship, as they once convinced themselves. It is a carefully maintained cycle of control, and they have been trapped in it for far too long. Once the pattern is clear, the empath begins taking back what was stolen. Their voice choked for so long by doubt, their boundaries continuously violated by demands, and their sense of self worn down by half-truths and emotional distortion. They realize they are not too sensitive. They are sensitive enough to perceive the truth. They realize they are not too much. They were simply standing next to someone too empty to handle their authenticity and light. They realize they are not hard to love. They were loving the wrong person, someone incapable of loving in return. This clarity marks a profound turning point. The empath no longer reacts unconsciously. They are no longer passive, no longer waiting for the narcissist to change. They shift from the overwhelmed victim to the conscious observer, a position from which they are no longer swept away by the narcissist's emotional tides, but stand apart, watching the entire pattern unfold. And from that position, the game begins to reverse. Not because they fight back, but because they stop being led. Not because they suddenly become stronger, but because they stop supplying the emotional energy the narcissist depends on. Not because they seek revenge, but because they wake up. That is the moment when control starts slipping out of the narcissist's hands quietly, but in a way that can never be undone. And then, when awareness has sharpened into a cold, clear mirror, the super empath enters the stage. The narcissist never anticipates the stage of withdrawing from the game, not through rage, not through dramatic retaliation, but through something far more terrifying to someone who survives on the reactions of others: intentional silence. In the early stages, the empath is still trapped in old instincts, trying to explain, trying to justify, trying to prove they are not wrong. They believe that if they are sincere enough, clear enough, kind enough, then one day the narcissist will understand and change. But then, a truth hits them like ice water. The narcissist does not need clarity, they need confusion. They do not seek truth, they seek to maintain enough ambiguity to keep you wandering in their emotional maze. And that is the moment the strategy begins to shift quietly, subtly, but with enough force to overturn an entire power dynamic that has existed for years. The super empath makes no announcements, no warnings. They simply stop participating. They stop chasing to explain. Stop defending what they know is true. Stop contorting their emotions to match the narcissist's storm. Instead, they observe, coldly, with a clarity that feels almost surgical. They see how stories are twisted to favor the narcissist. They see the double standards designed to keep them small. They see apologies crafted like hooks to pull them back into the cycle. They see compliments used as conditional rewards to keep them invested. And once they understand the entire mechanism, they know they can no longer pretend not to see. What follows is emotional detachment, not numbness, but awareness. This is when they erect a boundary deep within. Their emotions are no longer the center of my universe. From that point on, they no longer explain endlessly. They no longer defend themselves against fabricated accusations. They no longer respond the way the narcissist expects. This terrifies the narcissist in a way they cannot hide. Because their power only exists as long as you remain emotionally engaged. When the empath pulls the plug on emotional participation, the entire control system collapses as if the power has been cut. No fuel, no reaction, no one left to manipulate. And as the super empath's silence deepens, the illusions the narcissist built, the only true love, the special connection, the destiny between us, only I understand you, begin to crack and fall away. Like makeup melting in the rain, it exposes what was underneath all along. Not a wounded soul longing for healing, but a manipulator wrapped in sweetness. And the most devastating collapse for the narcissist is this: the empath does not scream. They do not fight back. They walk away from the game. In that absolute silence, the narcissist finally confronts the one thing they fear most: their own powerlessness. The greatest irony in the confrontation between the super empath and the narcissist lies here. The very weapon the narcissist once wielded ultimately becomes the force that destroys them. Silence used to be the narcissist's primary strike. They used it like a dark room to lock you in, leaving you anxious and breathless. They knew you feared emotional distance, so they turned absence into an invisible chain tightening around your chest. Each time they disappeared, they hoped you would panic, run after them, apologize, plead, explain, and blame yourself. But once the super empath awakens, silence is no longer a wound. It becomes a boundary, a conscious choice, a response without words, a declaration that, I am no longer playing this game. They no longer feel obligated to answer every attack, no longer feel the need to correct every distortion, no longer feel responsible for regulating every emotional storm the narcissist creates. From silence, they move into something even more powerful: indifference. If silence is a weapon, indifference is the blade that ends the war. Anger is still a connection. Arguing is still a hook. Being hurt is still a form of emotional attachment. But indifference? That is the final statement. You no longer have the power to affect me. 17. The person who once lost sleep over a short text message, who analyzed every punctuation mark, who apologized for things they never did, now no longer reacts. They do not wait for compliments. They do not fear being disliked. They do not need validation. They simply don't care anymore. And to the narcissist, that is a total collapse. They want to be loved or hated anything, as long as they remain at the center. But being ignored? That means becoming irrelevant. When the empath stops reacting, the old script no longer runs. It is like trying to install outdated software on a completely new operating system. It crashes every time. The narcissist tries to provoke no effect, tries to guilt-trip no response, tries to flatter, no one needs it, tries to threaten, no one fears it. The empath smiles when they wish, leaves conversations that no longer serve them, takes care of themselves instead of adjusting to someone else's chaos. They live by their own rhythm, a rhythm the narcissist can no longer interfere with. This is not chaos. This is self-governance. And it is precisely this self-governance that causes the narcissist's entire power structure to collapse from within. Because someone who built their whole identity on controlling others becomes powerless the moment they encounter a person they can no longer control. The one thing a narcissist never imagines is this: healing is the kind of revenge they cannot defend against, because their entire power only exists as long as you remain in pain. They want you permanently fragmented, haunted, doubting yourself, agonizing, endlessly asking, why? As long as the wound keeps bleeding, they still have a doorway back into your mind. But the moment you begin to heal, the entire game shifts. Healing is when you stop bleeding from the cuts they inflicted. Healing is when you stop waiting for an apology that will never come. Healing is when you look at their shadow and realize the good person you were holding on to never existed. And in that very process, you stop seeking closure from them. Instead, you give closure to yourself. You rewrite your story not as a victim defined by pain, but as someone who has walked through fire carrying clarity, dignity, and a spine forged from truth. The narcissist's influence fades because influence requires an entry point: your emotions, your mind, your time. Healing builds a wall where a wide-open door once stood. Where there used to be chaos, there is now peace. Where there used to be self-doubt, there is now unwavering self-trust. But the journey of the super empath doesn't stop there. They take one step further, one the narcissist never believed they were strong enough to make. They turn their pain into purpose. They do more than survive. They learn. They grow. They use the pain as raw material to build boundaries, choose better people, help others, and live a life so clear and honest that they no longer ask for permission to exist. This is the version of themselves the narcissist tried to suffocate, a self that is powerful, lucid, and unapologetically sensitive. And at this point, the narcissist loses twice. First, when they can no longer control you. Second, when they realize their cruelty is what awakened you. And the final message for you, if you are a super empath, is this: you don't need to retaliate. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to scream to be understood. You only need to heal. Reclaim your voice. Walk forward with your strength intact and your light unwarped. That is how you end the game. And that is also the blow that hurts the narcissist the most. You live a life over which they no longer have any power. If you have walked with me to the end of this journey, let me say this softly yet unmistakably: you are not weak. You simply loved with everything you had. Super empaths often believe they are too much, too sensitive, too soft. Aren't so. But the truth is this: those very qualities are what make you powerful in a world full of frozen hearts. The journey with a narcissist is not a test of your worth. It is a lesson in boundaries, intuition, and coming home to yourself. And if today you are healing, or trying to break free, or just now realizing you are standing at the edge of something toxic, remember this: your awakening will always terrify the narcissist, but it is the greatest gift you will ever give yourself. They will not give you closure. They will not give you answers. They will not give you the validation you longed for, but you do not need them to move forward. You never did. Listen to your body when it grows tired. Listen to your heart when it tightens. Listen to your intuition when it whispers. Something isn't right. You do not have to suffer to be loved. You do not have to shrink to be chosen. You do not have to lose yourself to keep someone who never held you with honesty in the first place. And if you've ever feared that leaving is a failure, remember, sometimes leaving is the quietest, yet strongest victory of your life. Because your silence is a beginning. Your indifference is a declaration. Your healing is a new life. And finally, a gentle message for you, the one listening to this in the middle of a long night. You deserve a love that doesn't make you doubt yourself. You deserve a connection that doesn't require endless explanation. You deserve the peace you forgot you once had. Take your next steps slowly but firmly. The world is much larger once you stop seeing it through your wounds. And you, a super empath, are not just surviving this story. You are opening a new chapter that the narcissist no longer has the right to enter. Your journey begins the moment you choose to say to yourself, "I am enough. I deserve more than this." It becomes a laboratory for indirect cruelty, a space where your compassion is used against you, where your kindness becomes the very tool they exploit to exhaust you. By the time you leave, the meal has long lost its flavor. You feel drained, hollow, as if you survived a quiet battle no one else noticed. And that is precisely the outcome they wanted. Looking back at all 7 locations, the grocery aisle, the bedroom, the hospital, the checkout counter, the airport gate, the important event, and the restaurant, a chilling truth becomes clear. None of them were random. They all share a deeper pattern. They are places where you should be safe, where you are simply being human, eating, shopping, traveling, connecting, celebrating. But those are exactly the environments a narcissist exploits to expand their power, because they understand that in spaces where you are naturally more vulnerable, they only need one well-timed strike to plant fear that lasts for years. They are not just ruining a night, a trip, an event, or a moment of intimacy. They are conditioning your mind. Little by little, they teach you to associate intimacy with shame, travel with abandonment, shopping with guilt, celebrations with anxiety, dining out with second-hand embarrassment, your basic needs with the threat of being punished. Over time, these associations crystallize into symptoms you may not understand: fear of crowded places, hesitation when making decisions, avoidance of intimacy, or the constant belief that you are doing something wrong. These reactions do not mean you are weak. They do not mean you are overly sensitive. They mean your brain has been conditioned in an abusive environment, and the truth must be named clearly. This is not anger issues, not poor communication, not bad days. This is systematic cruelty. They know exactly what they are doing. They know exactly how much it hurts. And they continue because it gives them what they crave most: power. So what does this mean for you? It means the shame you carry was never yours. It means you do not owe them endurance, explanations, or self-sacrifice. It means you have the right to reclaim the places they contaminated: the grocery store, the bedroom, the airport, the restaurant, and make them yours again. Most of all, it means this: you survived what others can barely imagine, and that makes you stronger, not broken. If you're still here with me, I want you to know your healing has already begun, simply by understanding the patterns that once trapped you. Thank you for watching until the end. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to feel less alone. And until the next video, let the healing begin.